Before the Ouija board, William Rosetti's diary gives an insight into Victorian Séances. This is by The Conversation, Barry Bullen, Visitor Professor, Kellogg College, University of Oxford. Death and disease are no strangers to the streets of Britain. By the late 19th century, tens of thousands of people had contracted fatal infections such as cholera, smallpox, and scarlatina, beginning with the first cholera epidemic of 1832, when detailed records first started being kept. Wave after wave of typhoid also swept over the population, where cause, diagnosis, and cure were all equally uncertain, and social class provided no protection. In his novel Bleak House, Charles Dickens recorded fever deaths in the slums of London, but the most prominent flesh and bone victim was Queen Victoria's own husband, Prince Albert. He was diagnosed with typhoid and died in December 1861. Meanwhile, a bizarre form of comfort was at hand. In 1848, in Rochester, New York, two sisters claimed to have received messages from the spirit of a long-dead inhabitant of their house, and their conversation with him fired the imagination of America. Soon, quote-unquote, table rapping swept the American continent. Modern spiritualism was born, and in the early 1850s, it crossed the Atlantic. Seances began to take place in the parlors and dining rooms of France, Germany, Italy, and Britain. All communication with the spirits was done through letters of the alphabet, similar to Ouija boards. The fashion of the spiritualist seances was fueled by those who longed for communication with long-lost loved ones or friends, and the pre-Raphaelite poet Dante Gabriele Rossetti, for example, started holding spiritualist seances after the death of his wife Elizabeth Siddal in 1862. Many of these took place in his home in Chelsea, attended by friends and acquaintances. The most regular participant was his brother, William Michael Rosetti. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box. Pursuing William Rosetti's stray memories led me and my colleagues Rosalind White and Leonard Bleakey to the special collection of the Library of University of British Columbia, where a small notebook by William Rosetti labeled Seance Diary is kept. We have co-edited his meticulous record of 20 seances that William attended between 1865 and 1868, published for the first time this year as a volume titled Pre-Raphaelites in the Spirit World, the Seance Diary of William Michael Rosetti. Many of the seances feature conversations he and his brother had with Elizabeth Siddal, whose presence punctuates the 3 recorded years, and many other features dead friends and relatives, according to William. On one occasion, their uncle, Gaetano Polidori, once Lord Byron's doctor, correctly confessed that he had died by suicide. On another, their Italian father, Gabriele Rosetti, was reportedly summoned and addressed the brothers in his native Italian language. Many of the spirits that Rosetti had said rose from the dark were artists, often responding accurately to being asked about when, where, and how the deaths had occurred. Some of the most remarkable manifestations involved figures of whom there is no evidence yet, whose accounts have been confirmed recently through the archival research of the editors of this volume. And so, like many people curious about spiritualism, we remain mystified by the bizarre accuracy of some of the messages coming from the spirit world through these diaries. William Rosetti was a diligent civil servant with a strong sense of probity and the eye for detail, and what he gave us in this little notebook was an unparalleled insight into the Victorian spirit world. Victorian Séances. The Rosettis were by no means the only Victorians committed to a belief in the occult. The poet Elizabeth Barrett Browning, the social reformer Robert Owen, the evolutionary biologist Alfred Russel Wallace and the novelist Arthur Conan Doyle were just a few more passionate believers in the power of seances. William Ewart Gladstone, Alfred Tennyson, John Ruskin, and the painter G.F. Watts were all members of the Society for Psychical Research, a badge of belief in spirit activity, and it was even rumored that Queen Victoria received messages from Prince Albert via a psychic teenage boy named Robert James Lees. Mediums became celebrities. The most famous D.D. Home came from Britain from America in 1855, came to Britain from America in 1855. In 1853, the novelist William Makepeace Thackeray met him in America and, convinced of his authenticity, used the pages of his journal, the Cornhill magazine, to promote Holmes' career. In Britain, one of the most famous mediums was Mary Marshall, who had risen to prominence in the late 1850s and who presided over a number of seances recorded by William Rosetti. But dealing with the dead created as many skeptics as it did fans. The novelist George Eliot and her partner G.H. Lewis turned to the press to denounce spiritualism as a sham. Meanwhile, the journal, once a week, described the aforementioned Mary Marshall as poor, vulgar, but hugely eminent as the washerwoman medium, describing the abominable profanity and wickedness of her seances. The satirical journal Punch was quick to seize on the comic potential of the new vogue. Weekly cartoons depicted humorous dialogues with the dead appeared, and just like this piece of doggerel in which Mr. Punch wanted to know what on earth are the merits that make Mrs. Marshall affected by spirits, wanted to know why respectable dead come back to life at 5 shillings a head. The most consistent war on spiritualism, however, was waged by the powerful voice of Dickens. He was outraged by D.D. Home. In 1860, he denounced Holmes' autobiography as odious, written by a ruffian and a scoundrel, and agreed with George Eliot that Home was an object of moral disgust, quote unquote. As for Mary Marshall and her daughter, he said they possessed the duplicity and legerdemain of 2 illiterate conjurers playing on, quote, the holiest and deepest feelings of their audience, end quote. Now, while the debate about authenticity raged, seances, both in public and in private, took place throughout the country. Some were spectacular displays of showmanship involving large audiences. Some were intimate, devout gatherings, while others took the form of after-dinner entertainment. The social and anthropological and religious role of spiritualism in Victorian culture has been much debated, but one important factor drove people to the darkened room of the medium, the need to contact a dead loved one. It was this motive that lay behind Elizabeth Barrett Browning's desire to communicate with her brothers, both of whom died in 1840. In February, Samuel died of fever in Jamaica, and shortly afterwards, her favorite brother Edward was drowned in a sailing accident in Torquay in July. Indeed, the biologist Alfred Russel Wallace started a career of his own in spiritualism after the death of his brother in 1845, and the death of Conan Doyle's son, Kingsley, strengthened the crime writer's lifelong belief in the occult. Death also lay behind the seances in William Rosetti's diary, since many of them were driven by his brother's desire to reach out to the spirit of his dead wife. Though there are many records of spiritualist experiences in the 19th century, what makes William Rosetti's diary so valuable is its detail. Every moment in the 20 seances is meticulously recorded. Every participant and his or her reaction to the events is noted down, and the presence of so many prominent artists from the pre-Raphaelite movement casts each of their personal beliefs and prejudices in a new light. The spirit world. The lights are dimmed. The candles flicker. William Michael Rosetti asks some questions of the spirit of Elizabeth Siddal, Dante Gabriel Rossetti's wife. His questions involve a picture that he has just sent to a wealthy patron in Birkenhead called George Ray. The questions are strange, the responses reported by the diary monosyllabic but accurate. William, did you consider that picture which Gabriel sent away the other day one of his very best? Elizabeth, yes. William, do you know to whom it has gone? Elizabeth, yes. William, give initial of surname. Elizabeth, R, correct for Ray. William, do you know in what room of Ray's house that picture is now placed? Elizabeth, yes. William, dining room? Elizabeth, no. William, drawing room? Elizabeth, yes. William, how many in the whole house? At that point, a pause of some 15 minutes ensued, within which no answers are reported. William, during that pause, were you absent looking into Ray's house? Elizabeth, yes. William, can you give me an idea of the process by which you passed from one place to another? Elizabeth, no. Dante Gabriel Rossetti's fascination with the occult went back to his early experiences of the poetry of Dante Alighieri in the scholarly work of his father Gabriel. In the course of his work, Gabriel frequently invoked the authority of the Swedish mystic Emanuel Swedenborg, who around 1744 began to have visionary experiences of his afterlife. He had become a seer, quote unquote, he said, by God's command to explain the correspondences between life on earth and life in heaven. He claimed not only communicated with angels and demons who spoke of how he had been admitted into the spirit world and how he had returned to the terrestrial sphere to tell the story. Consequently, Rosetti's poems and pictures are filled with spiritual experiences, with stories of hauntings and uncanny events. In the late 1850s, he began to participate in seances, but it was the death of his wife Elizabeth Siddal that lent his participation a new urgency. Prior to her death, Siddal had been suffering from postnatal depression caused by a stillbirth. Driven to despair by Dante Gabriel Rossetti's long-term infidelity and neglect of her, she took an overdose of laudanum. Dante Gabriel Rossetti was consumed by guilt and filled with remorse, and as some kind of compensation, he buried the whole manuscript of his unpublished poems in her coffin. But no sooner had she been placed in the earth than he began to have nightly visions of her in his bedroom. At that point, he decided to try and look for her in the afterlife. In October of 1862, abandoning the house which they had shared, he took up residence beside the River Thames, where he began holding seances with his new friend, the American painter James McNeill Whistler. Many years later, Whistler spoke of the strange things that happened when he went to seances at Rosetti's, since according to William Michael's daughter, Dante Gabriele Rossetti was anxious to get some message from Elizabeth. William Rossetti's Seance Diary. By the time William Rossetti began his Seance Diary in 1865, he was already a firm believer in spiritualist communications. Some of the seances he recorded came under the auspices of amateur mediums. The richer and most dynamic ones took place under the mediumship of two professionals, Mary Marshall and Elizabeth Guppy, and the very first one he recorded took place in Marshall's house. William Rossetti was accompanied by his artist friend William Bell Scott. The two men, who were certain that the Marshalls had no personal knowledge of them, wanted to make contact with the recently deceased brother of Scott's mistress, Spencer Boyd. The information that emerged from this seance was striking. The spirit of Spencer Boyd was reportedly summoned and stated correctly that he had died in Scott's home, provided the address together with the date on which he had passed away. He is also reported as correctly telling the group that he had heard of but never met William Scott in person. More startlingly, however, was the communication with people of whom there is no evidence that anyone present had any knowledge of, yet whose accounts have been subsequently confirmed by our own archival research. In February 1866, for example, a New Zealand Maori chief called himself Hemi is reported to have appeared out of the dark. Sources show that he had claimed to have met William Rossetti 3 years previously in Newcastle when the chief was touring Britain exhibiting Maori dances. Information gathered from historians in New Zealand and our own research in the archives of local papers, the Newcastle Chronicle, confirmed that in the week beginning September 14, 1863, a group of Maori chiefs had indeed performed to audiences in Newcastle. On the same day, Dante Gabriel Rosetti wrote a letter to a friend saying in passing that his brother was about to leave on a visit to Newcastle. On other occasions, what were called apports, A-P-O-R-T-S, apports, were allegedly materialized. Eau de cologne and water were described showering out of nowhere, books thrown from the bookcases, and in one incident, the medium asked the participants if they would like to receive flowers. In response, roses, ferns, and jonquils were requested and, to their amazement, appeared to have dropped out of the darkness onto the table in front of them or onto their laps. Dante Gabriel Rosetti invited Jane Morris, the wife of William Morris, on two of these seances where she claimed to have seen unexpected lights and cold drafts of air passing over her hands. The most moving and dramatic seance, however, are those that feature the spirit of Elizabeth Siddall. In the second seance recorded by William Rosetti, his brother spoke to her with clear reference to the past. Quote, "You used to give me clear and significant answers," he said, "but of late the reverse. Can you tell me why?" End quote. He writes that she had no answer. In a later seance, the spirit reportedly confessed that she knew William Bell Scott and thought that William Rosetti had been a very affectionate brother to Dante Gabriel Rosetti. Later, at the home of Thomas Knightley, historian and folklorist, the diary describes her as telling the participants that she knew William Morris and correctly told them his London address. The most intensive cross-questioning of Elizabeth's spirit took place in the very last seance at 2 a.m. on Friday, August 14, 1868. In this, the spirit was asked about the Rosetti's father, Gabriel, in the afterlife, about the nature of Christ, and about the nature of the manifestations that they had recently witnessed at another seance. The most touching exchange is described as occurring between Dante Gabriel and Elizabeth. Gabriel: "Are you my wife?" Elizabeth: "Yes." Gabriel: "Are you happy now?" Elizabeth: "Yes." Gabriel: "Happier than on earth?" Elizabeth: "Yes." Gabriel: "If I were now to join you, should I be happy?" Elizabeth: "Yes." Gabriel: "Should I see you at once?" Elizabeth: "No." Gabriel: "Quite soon?" Elizabeth: "No." Bogey pictures. Though they are not usually linked, during this period, both Dante Gabriel Rosetti and Whistler created pictures with an occult significance. Dante Gabriel's drawing How They Met Themselves, 1860 to 1864, is a ghostly double in a dense wood. It was completed in the first version during his honeymoon in 1860 and reworked as a colored version in 1864. Dante Gabriel Rosetti called it the bogey picture. William Rosetti said of it, "To meet one's wraith is ominous of death, and to figure Elizabeth as meeting her wraith might well have struck her bridegroom as uncanny in a high degree. In less than 2 years, the weird was woefully fulfilled." Then in 1863, both Whistler and Rosetti embarked on paintings with links to other spiritualist experiences. Whistler's Symphony in White No. 2, The Little White Girl, 1864, has a contemporary setting, and like Dante's drawing How They Met Themselves, it is also a doppelganger work. In it, Jo Hifferman, Whistler's mistress, and her reflected image gaze down towards a lacquered Japanese box which Whistler employed in seances. Attached to the frame were Swinburne's lines, "Art thou the ghost, my sister? White sister there, am I the ghost who knows?" Dante Gabriel Rosetti's Beta Beatrix, 1864 to 79, was begun at about the same time. And this is the red-headed woman that we see here in the portrait. Its original title was Beatrice in the Death Trance, a Dantean image which linked her death of Beatrice Portinari, the woman believed to be the muse for Dante's Vita Nuova, beside the Arno with Elizabeth Siddall's death beside the Thames, and the painting was based on an unfinished portrait of Elizabeth and depicts the moments of her passing from life into death. And the picture came to the notice of the prominent spiritualists William and Georgina Copper Temple. William Copper Temple was president of the Board of Trade, and he and Georgina presided over seances in their family home, were the most famous mediums of the day. In September 1865, they began to take an intense interest in Dante's Rossetti's work. They frequently visited his studio, where he was working on the paintings, and offered to buy it as a genuine spiritualist work. It was beneath this picture and in the same studio that Rossetti was trying to conjure up the spirit of Elizabeth Siddal. The Rossetti brothers have long been known for their contribution to writing and painting in the 19th century, but the record of their seances connects them to the widespread Victorian preoccupation with the occult. The huge mortality rate in Victorian Britain encouraged large numbers to seek the support of mediums. Similarly, around 1918, the carnage of the First World War and the waves of Spanish flu created an interest in spiritualism. Perhaps in this context, it's unsurprising that the pandemic now is reportedly driving a revival of the Ouija board. Though spiritualism is still surrounded with an air of suspicion and mystery, William Rosetti's diary shows that believing one has made contact with the next world is usually a source of consolation and reassurance. For some, spiritualism was as precious as fiction, as precise as fiction, a place to go to when needed to step away from too harsh a reality. So this is on the conversation, what they used to do concerning the Ouija boards and some of these famous people. This is by Barry Bullen, visiting professor at Kellogg College, University of Oxford, on the conversation, Creative Commons. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support.